Hi Tim, my first question is, what's logical or rational about racism?
Well, you might equally say what's logical about crime. The reason that I say that is I'm not arguing that racism is good. I'm just saying that racism can be advantageous. The argument of my book, The Logic of Life, is that people often respond to incentives. And if we want to deal with racism, we need to understand the incentives both for the racist and also for the victim. What does it do? How does it change people? Is it to their advantage or is it to their disadvantage?
Okay. You make a lot of examples in the book about discrimination, and you say discrimination is very expensive. Could you give me an example of those?
Sure. So, one of the interesting things about the effects of discrimination is what it does to the incentives of the people who are discriminated against. So I give you an example of how you test for discrimination. Economists do these experiments a lot now. They will write a resume, send the resume out, hundreds of copies of the resume, thousands of copies of the resume to different employers. And they will change the name on the resume to make it look like this is a man's resume or a woman's resume, that this is a indigenous resume or a foreigner's resume, it's a white resume or a black resume. Really, the resume is just always the same. They just change the name. And then they see who gets an interview and who doesn't get an interview. It's very powerful because it's like, it's an experiment, it's like testing a new drug, so it's a really scientific method. A recent experiment done to test in America white versus black resumes found two things. One is if your resume has a white name, you're more likely to get an interview. Okay, so that's bad. It's not a big surprise, but it's good to have it confirmed. But here's the second result that I think is really worrying. They sent out two kinds of resume. One, very well qualified, great exam results, relevant experience. The second kind of resume, no good qualifications, no real experience. The white resumes, if they were qualified, excellent chance of getting an interview. If they were badly qualified, less chance. With the black resumes, didn't make any difference. It didn't make any difference. So the employer was saying, black name, and then just didn't read any further. And that's very disturbing because you have to think, what is the effect now on a black school kid, a black student? He or she knows the employer, I could study hard, I could work hard, I could try to get experience, I could try to get exam qualifications. Will it do me any good? No. And then the problem is, you have the stereotypes become true. Yeah. Because then you find that the black school kids are not studying so hard, and that's rational because they know their qualifications will not be taken seriously. It's a big problem. How do you break out of that spiral?
Indeed, and I read on Financial Times, the 6th of September, there's a survey. British people, British citizens, think that the 64% of them think that immigration affected in a very negative way their country. So this is the perception of the people, the common people. Is this true, or that it affects so negatively? Or it's just a perception, and how the perception influences the politics of a country?
Sure. The perceptions are very interesting. I know I argue people are often rational, but not always. One thing I find fascinating, if you ask people about crime, they say, yeah, crime is a very serious problem for our country, but actually crime is falling. And you say, have you had a problem with crime? People go, oh no, I've had no problem, but it's a problem. It's a problem for everyone. You go, what about the economy? People say, yeah, the economy is terrible. You go, what about you? Have you had a problem? No, actually, I'm okay. But for everyone else, it's a problem. And the same with immigration. people say immigration is a real problem, and you say, okay, but for you, do you personally, have you experienced any trouble? No, not really. So that's worrying, to try to break people out of the media perception of immigration and try to get them to focus on their own experiences. I mean, it is true that immigrants can compete for jobs, they can lower wages. These things are all possible in theory, but the evidence for it is not very strong. And the main people that immigrants compete with for jobs is other immigrants.
Yes, it's a war between peers, we want to call it.
Yeah, my feeling is if you were born in Italy, you were raised Italian, you speak Italian, your friends are Italian, your contacts are Italian, you saw Italian television all your life, you're exposed to the Italian politics, Italian newspapers, all your experience is Italian. And somebody comes from Morocco, they don't speak Italian, they don't have any of this experience. If you were put out of work by this person, I say, well, why? You have every advantage. You have every advantage. Why is this person such a threat to you? And I think actually people, if they focus on their own experience, they find maybe immigrants aren't as much of a threat as they think.
Can economics give us a solution to these matters?
Now this is the subject of my next book, because the world is very unexpectedly complex. I have an example here. I'm going to show my book here. So this is the book. Here is a very interesting diagram from a Nobel Prize winner, Thomas Schelling. And he used a chessboard with black and white pieces to talk about racial segregation. And he had a very simple rule for how people move on this chessboard. Nobody here on this chessboard is a racist. Everybody's happy with a mixed neighborhood, but they want some people the same color. And Schelling showed, this is before computers. It's amazing. Computers now do this in 1 second, but he showed it just moving pieces around. He showed that although no one's a racist, what happens is you end up segregated. Here we have the black, the white, the black. This is a very simple illustration of a complex emergent pattern of behavior. And again, when we're looking at problems in the real world, we're talking about immigration, climate change, terrorism, innovation, development, the banks, the financial crisis. Economics has solutions, but these problems are so complex. We must be very humble. We have to experiment, we have to do things gradually. There's lots of trial and error. And this is what I'm exploring now, because we hate to admit that there's trial and error in the world. Let me give you an example from engineering. Here we are surrounded by this beautiful castle in Ferrara. It is amazing, truly amazing. How did this castle get built? It wasn't because of models of the laws of physics or the laws of engineering, because those things never work. And even today, engineers don't build structures based only on computer models and only on the laws of physics. It's on experience. So often you find that there's a problem with a building because the model was fine, but you forgot to adjust for the geology, or you forgot to adjust for the snowfall, or you forgot to adjust for the way people walk over the structure. And so there's that experimentation. We do that in engineering, and the engineers acknowledge it. But for some reason we don't want to admit it in economics. Two of the most famous British politicians, Margaret Thatcher, very famously said, "You turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning." She said, I don't turn. Tony Blair says, "I don't have a reverse gear." I don't know why, but we vote for these politicians. If I buy a car and the salesman says, "It doesn't turn, it doesn't reverse," I don't buy the car. But a politician says, "I don't turn, I don't reverse," we vote for the politician. So we must be much more humble and much more willing to say, "Yeah, I tried this, didn't work, I'm going to try something else." Economists need to do that, politicians need to do that, and we all need to do that.
It's true. It's sadly true. My last question. In a long term, how good politics of integration could have a good influence to the economy of a country, if you think so?
I hope so. And it's not certain. I think some people have oversold, some economists have oversold the benefits of immigration and said there are no problems, there's nothing, the difficulty of people working together, forget it, there's no problem. I think there are some problems, but I hope that the problems are things we can overcome. The truth is, diversity is very powerful in fueling economic growth. And when I say diversity, I don't mean the colour of your skin or my skin. I mean the way we think.
Exactly.
If we think differently, it means new ideas, it means new skills. And you can see that in the... Where's the richest and most successful city in the world? It's New York.
Yeah.
But nobody in New York...
Melting pot.
Yeah, nobody in New York is from New York. They're from all over the world. And that's one reason why it's so powerful. The same thing with Silicon Valley. So many people in Silicon Valley, Indians, Chinese.
Exactly.
It's a real fuel for creativity. So I don't say that there's never a problem with immigration. But I think that if we harness this right and if we are adults about it and willing to be tolerant, there's tremendous potential there.